The night was alive with the fury of the storm. Rain pounded against the rooftops of Willow Creek, drumming a relentless rhythm as wind howled through the trees, bending their branches like frail twigs. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the sleepy town in eerie flashes of white, followed by deep, rumbling thunder that rattled the window panes of every home. In one of those homes, a 5-year-old boy named Daniel, Dany to everyone who loved him, sat cross-legged near the front door, his small hands pressed against the cool glass. While most children would shrink away from the storm's fury, Dany was mesmerized by it. Every time the sky exploded in light, his brown eyes widened with wonder, and he eagerly counted the seconds before the answering boom of thunder. 1, 2, 3, he whispered, tracing invisible patterns on the wooden floor. That means it's 3 miles away. His mother, Maya, peeked out from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She frowned at the sight of him, sitting so close to the door. "Dany, sweetheart, come away from there," she called, concern lining her voice. "It's not safe." "But Mom," Dany protested, glancing back at her. "Dad said it's safe as long as I stay inside. I just like watching the rain." From the kitchen, his father, Noah, chuckled softly as he finished chopping vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board competed with the patter of raindrops on the windows. "Let him be, Maya," he said gently. "He's fine." Maya sighed, shaking her head. She had always been the more cautious one. Ever since they moved to Willow Creek a year ago, she found herself worrying more than she ever had before. Maybe it was the unfamiliar town, or maybe it was the fact that Dany had just started kindergarten, but she felt an overwhelming need to keep him close, to protect him from the world. Noah, on the other hand, believed in letting their son explore, in letting him be curious. He reached for his wife's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "He's brave, just like his mom." Maya rolled her eyes at the compliment, but smiled nonetheless. Dany, oblivious to his parents' conversation, continued watching the storm in fascination. He loved the way the rain turned the streetlights into glowing orbs, how the water ran down the glass in rivulets, creating strange patterns. He placed his small palm against the cold surface, feeling the faint vibrations of the wind as it whistled through the cracks of the doorframe. Then, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Scratch, scratch. Dany froze. He tilted his head, listening carefully. There it was again, a soft, desperate sound, almost drowned out by the howling wind. And then, a whimper. His heart jumped. That wasn't the wind. Slowly, he pressed his ear against the door, straining to hear past the rain. Scratch, scratch. A low whine followed, rising and falling like a plea. Dany's breath hitched. Someone or something was outside. He pressed his face against the small glass pane of the door, squinting through the rain-streaked surface. The porch light cast a weak, flickering glow over the wooden steps, but he couldn't make out anything distinct, just shifting shadows. Then lightning flashed. For a brief, frozen second, the entire front yard was illuminated in stark, white light. And that's when Dany saw them. A large figure huddled against the door, shielding 3 smaller shapes beneath it. The moment passed in a blink, darkness returning like a curtain falling over a stage. Dany gasped. "Mom! Dad!" he called, his voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and concern. "There's someone outside!" Noah set down his knife immediately, concern flashing across his face. "What did you say, buddy?" "There's someone at the door," Dany insisted, pressing his hands flat against the glass. Maya wiped her hands quickly, rushing into the living room. Her protective instincts kicked in immediately. "Dany, step away from the door," she said firmly. "Noah, check who it is." Noah walked cautiously to the door and peered through the peephole, but all he saw was rain and darkness. "I don't see anyone," he said, frowning. "It's probably just the wind blowing something against the house." "No, Dad, I saw them!" Dany's voice was urgent. "There was a big one and little ones. I saw them when the lightning flashed." Noah hesitated. Their son had an active imagination, but he wasn't the type to make up stories like this. Just then, the scratching sound came again, louder this time, and then unmistakably a pleading whimper. Maya's expression softened slightly. "It sounds like a dog," she murmured. Dany nodded vigorously. They need help. They're cold and wet, Mom, please. Noah exchanged a look with Maya. The storm was brutal, and if there was an animal out there, it was likely in distress. But strays could be unpredictable, especially if they were scared or protecting young. I'll take a look, Noah decided. Both of you, stand back. Maya pulled Dany behind her as Noah unlocked the door and cracked it open slightly. Immediately, rain gusted in, dampening the floor. I don't see, Noah began, but then another lightning flash illuminated the porch. And there she was, a German shepherd soaking wet, her fur clinging to her thin frame. Her deep brown eyes locked onto Noah's, pleading, desperate, intelligent. And behind her, 3 tiny puppies shivered in a huddled mass, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. Oh my God, Noah whispered. Dany, his small body trembling with excitement, slipped from his mother's grasp and took a step closer. Dad, we have to help them. Noah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He pulled the door open wider. The mother dog whimpered again, glancing between Noah and her puppies as if asking permission. And then, as if knowing she had finally found safety, she nudged her babies forward. One by one, the tiny puppies stumbled across the threshold, their little legs wobbling on the wooden floor. The mother dog followed, her movements careful and deliberate. The storm raged on outside, but inside, something far more powerful was unfolding. Dany knelt beside the trembling animals, his heart swelling with a feeling he couldn't quite name. They're safe now, he whispered, gently touching the mother dog's soaked fur. And in her deep, knowing eyes, he swore he saw gratitude. The warmth of the house wrapped around them, a stark contrast to the storm still raging outside. Rain continued to hammer against the roof, wind howling through the trees, but inside the atmosphere was shifting. The moment the mother dog and her 3 tiny puppies crossed the threshold, it was as if the storm outside had faded into the background. Dany knelt on the floor beside them, his small hands trembling with excitement and concern. He could feel the cold radiating from their drenched fur, see the way their tiny bodies shivered. The mother dog, a beautiful yet weary-looking German shepherd, stood protectively over her puppies, her deep brown eyes darting between Dany, his parents, and the room around her. She was alert, cautious, but not afraid. She's so cold, Dany whispered, his voice laced with worry. We need to help her. Maya hesitated, her motherly instincts warring within her. On one hand, she knew the right thing to do was to offer shelter to these poor creatures, but on the other, she couldn't ignore the risks. A stray dog, especially one with puppies, could be unpredictable. Noah, she murmured, casting her husband a look filled with uncertainty. Noah knelt beside Dany, carefully extending his hand toward the mother dog. Hey girl, he said gently. His voice was low, soothing. It's okay. You're safe now. The dog stiffened slightly, but didn't growl or retreat. Instead, she studied Noah with those intelligent eyes, as if assessing whether or not he could be trusted. Dany watched in awe. He could feel something unspoken passing between his father and the dog, a silent understanding that words could never capture. She's not dangerous, Mom, he insisted, his small hands reaching toward one of the shivering puppies. She just needs help. The mother dog immediately tensed, her body shifting slightly as if to shield her babies. But then, she hesitated. She looked at Dany, then at his hands, and something in her seemed to soften. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped back, allowing the boy to reach for her pup. Maya let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She trusts him, Noah said, glancing up at his wife. I think she knows we're trying to help. Maya sighed, rubbing her forehead before nodding. All right, but we need to keep them in the mudroom, just until we figure out what to do next. Dany beamed. I'll get some towels. He bolted up, his feet pattering against the wooden floor as he rushed toward the linen closet. The mother dog let out a small whimper, her body still visibly shaking. She looked exhausted, worn down, not just by the storm, but by something deeper. Noah stood and grabbed a few more towels from the laundry basket. She looks like she's been through a lot, he murmured to Maya. That limp, I don't think it's new. Maya sighed, her medical instincts kicking in. She might have been injured for a while. Dany came rushing by, his arms overflowing with towels. Here, we have to dry them off before they get sick. Together they worked carefully, patting down the puppies first. The little ones, one with a dark coat, one with a white star-shaped patch on its chest, and the last one, slightly bigger than the others, squirmed weakly, but they didn't fight against the warmth of the towels. Dany giggled when one of them, the smallest, nuzzled into his hand, its tiny nose cold and wet against his skin. "She likes me," he whispered. The mother dog watched intently, her ears twitching, but she made no move to stop them. Once the puppies were dry, Noah turned his attention to her. "Let's get you warm too, girl," he murmured, carefully reaching out with a towel. She flinched slightly, but didn't move away. Instead, she let out a deep sigh, almost as if she was allowing herself to let go of the tension she had been holding onto for so long. Maya knelt beside her. "Poor thing," she whispered. As she dabbed gently at the dog's fur, she noticed something, thin ribs beneath damp fur. "She hasn't eaten properly in a long time." "I'll get some food," Dany chirped, already scrambling toward the kitchen. Noah chuckled. "He's on a mission." Maya gave him a small smile but then frowned as she ran her hands along the dog's side. Her fingers paused when they brushed against something. A wound, not fresh but not healed either. "Noah," she said, her voice quiet. He turned, his gaze following her hand. "That looks painful." Dany returned just in time, holding a small plate of leftover chicken. "Here, girl," he said, setting the food down in front of her. The mother dog hesitated, looking from the food to Dany, then back again. Slowly, cautiously, she lowered her head and took a tentative bite. Dany grinned. "See? She trusts us." The room fell into a comfortable silence as the little family of dogs settled in. The storm outside raged on, but inside there was warmth, safety, and something else. Something unspoken yet deeply felt. "She needs a name," Dany said suddenly, looking up at his parents. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Dany, we're not keeping them." "I know," he said, though his voice held a note of sadness. "But we can't just call her Dog." Noah chuckled. "Fair point. What do you want to call her?" Dany thought for a moment. His eyes flickered toward the window, where rain still streaked against the glass. "She came to us in the storm," he said softly, "like the moon through the clouds." Maya and Noah exchanged glances. "I'm going to call her Luna," Dany announced with certainty. As if understanding, the mother dog lifted her head. Her deep, knowing eyes met Dany's, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her tail topped the smallest wag. "Luna," Noah tested the name. "I like it." Maya sighed but couldn't help but smile. "All right, but only for tonight." Dany grinned, reaching out to gently scratch behind Luna's ears. "Good night, Luna," he whispered. "You're safe now." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that small house on Maple Street, something had shifted. A new story had begun. The warmth of the house wrapped around Luna and her puppies like a protective cocoon, shielding them from the raging storm outside. The little ones, now dry and nestled into a soft blanket, had finally stopped shivering. Their tiny bodies curled against their mother, rising and falling with each breath. Luna, though still tense, seemed to understand that, for the first time in what may have been a long while, she and her babies were safe. Dany sat beside them, his fingers gently stroking the soft fur of the smallest puppy, the one with the white, star-shaped patch on her chest. His heart swelled with something he didn't quite have words for yet, but it felt warm, like the way his mother held him when he had bad dreams. Maya, standing near the doorway, watched her son with an expression caught between concern and quiet admiration. Noah broke the silence. "We should check if anyone is looking for them." His voice was low, careful, as if saying it too loudly might shatter the fragile peace that had settled over the room. Maya nodded, though she hesitated. "I'll call the local shelter in the morning. Maybe someone reported a missing dog." At the word missing, Dany stiffened. He turned to look at his parents, his brown eyes wide with something close to panic. "But what if they don't have a home?" Noah sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then we'll figure something out." Dany bit his lip but nodded. He didn't like the answer, but he trusted his parents. Maya crouched down next to Luna, examining her up close. "She's been through something," she murmured, carefully running her fingers along the dog's ribs. Luna tensed but didn't pull away. "She's too thin, and this wound..." Her fingers traced the healing scar on Luna's side, her brows knitting together in concern. Dany reached out, touching Luna's fur with all the tenderness his small hands could offer. "She's a good dog, Mom. I know it." Luna turned her head, looking straight at the boy. And then she did something that made the breath catch in Maya's throat. She leaned forward and licked Dany's hand. A silent promise. A thank you. Maya exhaled, nodding. "Okay, she stays for the night." Dany grinned, hugging Luna's neck as gently as he could. Noah, meanwhile, stood and stretched. "We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." Maya stood, rubbing her temples. "I'll set out some more blankets for them in the mudroom." Dany watched as Luna curled herself protectively around her puppies, her body forming a barrier of warmth and safety. He yawned, suddenly realizing just how tired he was. "Good night, Luna," he whispered before following his parents up the stairs. The storm raged on outside, but inside the house was quiet, filled with the slow, steady breaths of its inhabitants, both the two-legged and the four. Somewhere in the middle of the night, the sound came again. Scratch, scratch. Luna's ears perked up instantly. Her muscles tensed, her body coiling like a spring as she lifted her head. Scratch, scratch. She rose carefully, stepping over her sleeping puppies as she padded silently toward the door. Her wet nose pressed against the crack at the bottom, inhaling deeply. Something was out there. A growl rumbled low in her throat. Upstairs, Dany stirred. He had always been a light sleeper, and even in his dreams, he felt the shift in the air. Then the whimper came. Luna's growl stopped instantly. She cocked her head, listening. The whimper was quiet, almost imperceptible, over the wind still rattling the windows. But it was there, a plea. She stepped back from the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dany's eyes flew open. He sat up quickly, his breath caught in his throat. Something was wrong. Without hesitation, he climbed out of bed and hurried downstairs, his small feet barely making a sound against the wooden steps. The house felt colder than before, and an uneasy feeling prickled along the back of his neck. As he reached the bottom of the staircase, he stopped. Luna was at the door, standing completely still, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. Her ears were pricked forward, her tail low but rigid. Dany swallowed. "Luna," he whispered. The dog didn't turn, but she flicked one ear back at the sound of his voice. He stepped closer, peering out through the rain-streaked glass. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, the night outside was illuminated. There, just beyond the porch, a shadow stood, a large shadow. Dany's heart slammed against his ribs. When the light disappeared, so did the figure. The breath he had been holding escaped in a shaky exhale. His fingers gripped the edge of the door. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, barely able to find his voice. Then, scratch, scratch. Dany's blood ran cold. Luna let out a low, warning growl. Thunder boomed overhead, rattling the house. And then silence. No more scratching, no more whimpering, just silence. Dany's chest rose and fell quickly, his mind racing. Had he imagined it? Luna stayed by the door for another moment, unmoving, before finally turning her head to look at him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. But somehow Dany understood. Something had been out there. Something was watching. And Luna knew it. Dany swallowed hard. He wanted to wake his parents, to tell them what he had seen. But a part of him, something deep in his gut, told him that whatever had been out there was already gone. For now, he reached out and gently touched Luna's head. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's go back to sleep." Luna hesitated, but eventually she let him lead her away from the door. She curled up with her puppies once more, but this time her body remained tense, her ears flicking at every little sound. Dany climbed onto the couch nearby, pulling a blanket over himself. He kept his eyes on Luna, watching as her breathing slowed but never fully relaxed. She was still listening, still waiting. As his eyelids grew heavy, one last thought whispered through his mind. Something is coming. And deep down, he knew. Luna knew it too. The morning arrived reluctantly, gray clouds still hanging low in the sky, remnants of the furious storm that had battered Willow Creek the night before. The streets were damp, puddles reflecting the dull light as the town slowly awakened. But inside the Morgan house, the world had already changed. Dany had barely slept. He had dozed off at some point in the early hours, curled up under a blanket on the couch, but his dreams had been restless, filled with flickers of lightning, the scratching at the door, and the shadow that had stood beyond the porch. Now, as he blinked the sleep from his eyes, he saw Luna, lying in the mudroom, her head resting on her paws, her brown eyes half-lidded but still alert. The puppies were nestled against her belly, warm and safe, their tiny bodies rising and falling in the rhythm of deep sleep. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then, he remembered. The scratching, the whimpering, the shadow in the storm. Dany sat up abruptly, his heart still uneasy. Had it really happened? Or had his imagination played tricks on him? Luna lifted her head at his movement, her ears twitching. She studied him for a moment before exhaling a long breath, her tail thumping weakly against the floor. She knew. Dany swallowed hard, slipping off the couch. His bare feet made no sound as he padded across the wooden floor, past the darkened windows toward the door. He hesitated before reaching for the knob, his small fingers trembling slightly. Taking a deep breath, he turned it and pulled the door open just a crack. The morning air was crisp and cool. The porch, still damp from the night's rain, creaked slightly under the weight of the wind. He stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the yard, the street beyond, the towering oak tree at the edge of their property. Nothing. No footprints in the wet earth, no sign that anyone or anything had been there. Had it all been in his head? Dany exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and confusion settling in his chest. He was about to turn back inside when a sudden warmth brushed against his leg. Luna. She had followed him out, standing at his side, her nose lifted slightly, sniffing the air. Her ears twitched, her body still in alert, her muscles tense. Dany reached out, his fingers curling gently into her fur. "Did you hear it too?" he whispered. Luna didn't answer, of course. But she stayed by his side, her presence a silent confirmation. A gust of wind rustled the trees, sending a shiver through the leaves. "Dany?" His mother's voice called from inside, laced with sleep and worry. Dany turned, finding Maya standing in the doorway, her dark hair a mess, her robe pulled tightly around her. Her eyes flicked from him to Luna, then back to him again. "What are you doing out here, sweetheart?" Dany hesitated before answering. "I thought I heard something last night." Maya's brows furrowed. "The storm was loud," she said gently. "Maybe it was just the wind." Dany nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Maya sighed, stepping onto the porch and wrapping her arms around herself. "Come on, let's get inside. It's cold." As they stepped back into the house, the comforting scent of coffee filled the air. Noah was already up, setting plates on the table, his usual morning routine undisturbed by the events of the night before. "Good morning," he greeted, ruffling Dany's hair as he passed. Dany sat at the table, but his mind was elsewhere. Luna had trusted them enough to step into their home. She had guided her puppies inside, accepting their kindness, their warmth. But something had been outside last night. Something had been watching, and Luna knew it. After breakfast, Maya knelt beside Luna, running her hands gently over the dog's side. "She's thin," she murmured, frowning as her fingers traced the wound hidden beneath Luna's fur. "This injury isn't fresh, but it's not healed either." Dany sat cross-legged beside them, watching intently. "She's strong, though," he said softly. "She took care of her babies even when she was hurt." Maya smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, she did." Luna watched them, her eyes warm but guarded. When Maya pulled back, Luna turned her attention to Dany and, to his surprise, nudged his hand gently with her nose. "She likes you," his mother observed. Dany grinned, scratching behind Luna's ears. "I like her too." Maya exhaled, glancing at Noah, who stood by the counter, sipping his coffee. "We need to figure out what we're going to do," she said. Noah nodded. "I'll call the shelter after work, see if anyone's reported her missing." Dany's heart sank at the thought. What if no one's looking for her? Noah met his son's gaze. "Then we'll figure something out." Dany swallowed hard but nodded. That night, as the house settled into quiet once more, Luna remained awake. She lay curled around her puppies, but her eyes never fully closed. Her ears twitched at every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows. She was listening, waiting. And then, scratch. It was faint, almost imperceptible. But it was there. Luna's ears snapped forward, her body going rigid. She lifted her head, her dark eyes locked on the door. Scratch! A low growl rumbled in her throat. The sound was different this time. Less desperate, more patient. Luna's fur bristled, her muscles tensing beneath her skin. Dany stirred upstairs, something in his dreams tugging at him, pulling him toward wakefulness. And downstairs, in the darkened mudroom, Luna stood, silent, listening. Because she knew whatever was out there, it wasn't gone. Luna stood motionless in the dimly lit mudroom, her breath slow and steady, her ears pricked forward as she listened. The scratching had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of silence that felt deliberate, as if something out there was waiting, watching. A soft whimper from behind her pulled her attention for a brief moment. One of her puppies, the smallest with the white star on her chest, stirred in her sleep, pressing closer to her siblings for warmth. Luna turned her head, her protective instincts flaring. The puppies were safe for now, but she could not ignore the uneasy feeling pressing against her chest. Her gaze returned to the door. She took a slow step forward, then another. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick, wet stillness. She could hear the faint rustle of tree branches shifting in the wind, the distant hum of crickets that had begun their nightly song again. But there was something else, a presence of shivering. She sniffed the air, searching for a scent, but all she caught was the damp earth, the lingering scent of rain, and a flash of movement. Luna's body stiffened. A shadow shifted just beyond the porch, too quick to see clearly. Her heart pounded. A warning growl rumbled deep in her throat. Upstairs, Dany's eyes fluttered open. Even half asleep, he felt it. That invisible pull, the same one that had woken him the night before. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, then turned toward the door. Luna was calling him, not with words, not even with sound, but with something deeper, something he understood. Dany slid out of bed and tiptoed down the stairs, his small hands gripping the railing as he moved carefully through the darkened house. He was barely awake, but his feet knew the way. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he stopped. Luna was at the door again, standing as still as a statue, and then the sound came again. Scratch. Dany's breath hitched. He took a hesitant step forward. "Luna," he whispered. The dog flicked one ear back, but didn't turn her head. She was completely focused on whatever was outside. Dany swallowed hard. He reached for the doorknob, his fingers barely brushing against the cold metal when a sharp gust of wind rattled the windows. Luna's growl deepened, her teeth flashing in the low light. Dany froze. He knew that growl. It wasn't the kind of sound Luna made when she was being protective. It wasn't the kind of sound she made when she was cautious. This was different. This was a warning. And then, as if sensing they had been discovered, the shadow outside moved. It didn't step back. It didn't retreat. It lingered. Dany's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there. And they weren't just passing by. They were watching. Dany's fingers curled into Luna's fur, seeking comfort in her warmth. She didn't flinch. She stayed rooted in place, her body a solid wall between him and whatever lurked beyond the door. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the presence was gone. No more scratching, no more movement. Just the eerie quiet of a world that had returned to normal too quickly. Luna remained tense for a long time, her gaze still locked on the porch. But after a few moments, she let out a low huff and finally turned away. She nudged Dany gently with her nose, as if telling him it was over. For now, Dany swallowed, his throat dry. He glanced at the door one last time before whispering, "Come on, girl, let's go back to sleep." Luna hesitated before following him, but as she curled back around her puppies, her ears remained alert. She would not let her guard down again. And neither would Dany. Morning came with golden light spilling through the windows, chasing away the fears of the night. But even in daylight, Dany couldn't shake the unease sitting heavy in his chest. Something had been there, and Luna had known it too. Over breakfast, he picked at his eggs, barely listening as his parents talked about work, groceries, and plans for the weekend. His mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment of the night before. He knew he should tell them. But what if they didn't believe him? What if they told him it was just a storm? He didn't want to hear that because he knew, Luna knew, and that was enough. Noah's voice broke through his thoughts. "Dany?" Dany blinked, looking up. "Huh?" "I asked if you wanted to come with me to the shelter later," his dad said. "They'll scan Luna for a microchip, just in case she has an owner looking for her. Dany's stomach twisted. Owner, the word felt wrong. Luna wasn't just a dog. She wasn't just lost. She had come to them for a reason, and Dany wasn't ready to let her go. She doesn't have one, he blurted out before he could stop himself. Noah raised an eyebrow. How do you know that? Dany hesitated. Because she came to us, because she needed us, because something bad happened to her before she got here. But how could he explain that in a way that made sense? He bit his lip, looking down at his plate. I just know. Maya and Noah exchanged glances. Noah sighed, rubbing his chin. Well, let's find out for sure. Dany said nothing, his fingers curling around the hem of his shirt. Luna lay at his feet, her head resting against his legs. She didn't move. But her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, stayed locked on his. And in that moment, Dany understood something. Luna hadn't just chosen their house at random. She had picked them because she knew they would listen, because she trusted them, and because somehow she needed them just as much as they needed her. Dany sat in the back seat of his dad's SUV, watching the scenery blur past as they drove toward the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. The morning sun had burned away the last remnants of the storm, leaving the world bright and clean. Birds chirped from the tree branches, the leaves still heavy with droplets of rain. It should have felt like a new beginning, but Dany couldn't shake the weight pressing against his chest. Luna lay stretched across the back seat beside him, her head resting against his thigh. She was calm but alert, her ears flicking at every passing sound. The puppies had stayed home with his mom, curled up in the nest of blankets they had made for them in the mudroom. Dany stroked Luna's fur absent-mindedly, his fingers tracing the still damp strands. She had let them clean her up last night, had accepted the warmth of their home, but there was something in her that remained untamed, a wariness that hadn't faded. She didn't belong to anyone, he was sure of it. And yet, here they were, heading to the shelter where someone might be looking for her. His stomach twisted at the thought. Noah glanced at him through the rearview mirror. You're quiet this morning, bud. Dany shrugged, still focused on Luna. He hesitated. What if someone comes to take her away? Noah sighed, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. If she has an owner, Dany, it means she was loved before she found us. It wouldn't be fair to keep her from them. Dany shook his head. But what if she ran away on purpose? Noah didn't have an answer for that. The Willow Creek Animal Shelter was small but well kept, a brick building with a bright blue sign that read Helping Paws. The moment they stepped inside, the scent of disinfectant and dog fur filled the air. A few barks echoed from the back rooms where kennels lined the walls. A woman with graying hair and kind eyes stood behind the reception desk. She looked up as they entered and smiled warmly. You must be the Morgans. I'm Susan. We spoke on the phone. Dany nodded, gripping Luna's leash a little tighter. She's beautiful, Susan said, her gaze soft as she studied Luna. And well-trained. You said she showed up at your house during the storm? Noah nodded. With 3 puppies. We wanted to see if she had a microchip, just in case someone is looking for her. Susan motioned toward the back. Come with me. We'll check. They followed her into an exam room where a veterinarian, an older man with thin glasses, waited. He greeted them with a nod before taking out a handheld scanner. Hold her still for me, he said. Dany didn't have to. Luna sat calmly, watching the man with unreadable eyes. The scanner passed over her shoulders, her neck, the space between her shoulder blades. Silence. The vet tried again and again. Finally, he looked up. Nothing. Dany let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Noah, however, frowned. That's strange. A dog like this, she's clearly trained. You'd think someone would have chipped her. Susan scribbled something in her notes. We'll check our missing reports, just in case. Dany's chest tightened. He wanted to believe that no one had reported her missing, that she had chosen to come to them because she belonged with them. But before anyone could say anything else, the front door chimed. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a rain-spattered jacket despite the now clear skies. His boots were muddy, as if he had been walking through wet ground. His eyes swept across the room, and the moment they landed on Luna, something changed. His posture stiffened, his jaw tensed, and then he smiled. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm looking for a dog. Dany felt Luna press against his leg. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Susan, ever polite, stepped forward. We can help with that. What kind of dog are you missing? The man's gaze didn't leave Luna. German Shepherd, female, about 2 years old. Dany's grip tightened on the leash. Susan nodded, flipping through her notes. Do you have any identifying features? A photo, maybe? The man hesitated, just for a second. No photo, he said. She ran off during the storm. Should have been wearing a red collar, but she might have lost it. Dany's heart pounded. Luna didn't have a collar when they found her. Susan frowned slightly. Well, we did have a shepherd brought in last night. She's mine. The words were sharp, too quick. Susan blinked, caught off guard. Sir, we have to follow procedure. If she's yours, we'll need proof. The man took a step forward. Luna growled again, deeper this time. Dany could feel her muscles tensing. Noah placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. Easy, buddy. Susan cleared her throat. Sir, do you know if your dog has a microchip? A pause, the man's expression faltered, just for an instant. Then he recovered. No, he said smoothly. She was supposed to get one, but I never got around to it. The vet and Susan exchanged a glance. Dany wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew. Luna didn't like this man. She was afraid of him. And if there was one thing Dany had learned, it was that Luna didn't get scared easily. Noah's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. If she's yours, then you won't mind if we take some time to verify that. The man's gaze flickered to Noah, then to Dany. And for a split second, Dany saw something else in his eyes. Recognition. His stomach dropped. He knew this man, not in the way he knew his teachers or the man who ran the grocery store. He knew him the way prey knows the hunter. Luna knew him too, and she was terrified. A long silence stretched between them. Then suddenly the man forced a chuckle. You know what? Maybe I was mistaken. He took a slow step back, his hands raised in mock surrender. I'll keep looking. He turned to leave, but as he pushed open the door, he glanced back. His eyes met Dany's. This isn't over. And then he was gone. Silence filled the room. Dany felt the breath shudder out of his cheeks. Noah looked at Susan. Did that seem off to you? Susan nodded slowly. Very. Dany knelt beside Luna, pressing his face into her fur. She's not his, he whispered. Luna nuzzled into him, the way she had the first night. She was telling him what he already knew. She hadn't just run away, she had escaped. And whoever that man was, he wanted her back. The drive home from the shelter there was quiet, too quiet. Dany sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his mind racing. Luna was curled beside him, her body tense despite the warmth of the sun streaming through the glass. She wasn't trembling. Luna wasn't the kind of dog that trembled, but there was something wrong. She didn't trust that man, and neither did Dany. The way she had growled, the way her body had stiffened, the way she had pressed against him as if trying to keep him safe. It hadn't been just fear. It had been recognition. She knew him, and she didn't want to go back. Dany clenched his hands into fists. Noah glanced at him through the rearview mirror. You okay, buddy? Dany swallowed, nodding, but he wasn't okay. He was angry. His dad had seen it too. He had to have. The way the man hesitated, the way he lied about the collar, the way he backed off the moment they started asking questions. He wasn't Luna's owner. He was something else. Someone worse. Noah exhaled slowly. That guy, something was off about him. Dany turned to face his dad. We're not letting him take Luna, right? His voice came out sharper than he intended. Noah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. No one's taking her unless they can prove she belongs to them. Dany's chest felt tight. But what if he tries to come back? Noah was silent for a moment, then he sighed. Let's just get home first, okay? But that wasn't an answer, and Dany knew it. Maya was waiting for them when they pulled into the driveway. She had a puppy tucked in the crook of her arm, its tiny body still drowsy from a nap. The moment Dany stepped out of the car, she frowned. What happened? Noah glanced at him before answering. We met someone at the shelter, a man claiming Luna was his. Maya's brow shot up. What? Dany was already kneeling beside Luna, his fingers curling into her fur as if that would keep her from disappearing. She was scared of him, Mom, he said firmly, like, really scared. Maya's expression shifted. She wasn't just a mom, she was a nurse. She had seen fear in people before, in the way their bodies held tension, in the way their eyes darted toward exits even when their mouths said everything was fine. She knew how to read pain, and right now she was reading it in Luna. Maya looked at Noah. Did he have proof? Nope. Did she have a microchip? Noah shook his head. Nothing, but the second that guy saw her, he just knew. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. That's not good. Noah ran a hand through his hair. No, it's not. The air between them was heavy, thick with unspoken concerns. Dany felt his stomach twist. So what do we do? Maya glanced down at Luna. The German shepherd had settled beside Dany, her body positioned between him and the open yard, as if she was already preparing for another fight. Maya's fingers tightened around the puppy she was holding. We keep her safe, she said, and we don't let her out of our sight. Dany nodded. Good, because if that man came back, Dany wasn't going to let him take her. The rest of the afternoon passed in uneasy quiet. Dany sat in the mudroom with Luna and her puppies, his back pressed against the wall as he watched her. She wasn't sleeping. She would close her eyes for a few minutes at a time, but every little sound made her ears flick, her muscles tighten. She was waiting, so was he. A storm was coming. Not the kind with rain and thunder, something worse. And Luna knew it. As the sun dipped below the trees, Maya came in and placed a hand on Dany's shoulder. Dinner, sweetheart. Dany didn't want to leave. He didn't want to let Luna out of his sight. But his mom gave him a look, the one that meant, I know you're worried, but you still have to eat, so he reluctantly stood up. Luna followed him into the kitchen. She didn't like being alone either. Maya had made chicken soup, the kind that made the whole house smell warm and safe. Dany sat down, but his appetite was gone. Across the table, Noah was scrolling through his phone. Maya raised an eyebrow. What are you looking for? Noah exhaled. Missing dog reports, news stories, anything that might explain where Luna came from. Maya leaned over, scanning the screen. Anything? Noah shook his head. Nothing recent. Dany took a small bite of soup, but barely tasted it. His mind was still turning, still piecing things together. Dad? He asked hesitantly. Noah looked up. Yeah, bud? Dany hesitated, then, what if she wasn't just a lost dog? Noah frowned. What do you mean? Dany's fingers tightened around his spoon. What if she was running from something? A heavy silence followed, then bang! A sharp knock at the door. Everyone froze. Luna's head snapped up. Dany's breath caught in his throat. Maya's voice was low. Who would come this late? Noah pushed back his chair, his expression guarded. I don't know, Luna growled. Not a soft warning, not a protective rumble. A deep, guttural sound that sent chills down Dany's spine. Noah slowly moved to the door, peering through the peephole. His entire body tensed. Dany's heart slammed against his ribs. Dad? Noah exhaled sharply, then stepped back, his face unreadable. Get Luna and the puppies to the back room, he said quietly. Maya's eyes widened. Noah, now. Maya didn't argue. She grabbed Dany's wrist and pulled him toward the hallway, but Dany couldn't move. He needed to see. He needed to know. Luna stayed beside him, her growl vibrating through the floorboards. Noah reached for the doorknob. The world held its breath, and then he opened it. A man stood on their porch. Not the one from the shelter, someone worse. His clothes were worn, his hair unkempt, his eyes shadowed with something unreadable. But what made Dany's stomach drop, what made Luna's growl turn into a full-blown snarl, was what the man was holding. A photograph. And in the photograph was Luna, and underneath it in bold black ink were 3 words that made Dany's blood run cold. Missing, reward offered. The photograph in the stranger's hand shook slightly, caught in the cold night air. Noah didn't move. He stood in the doorway, his posture rigid, his breath slow and measured. Behind him, Dany felt his mother's grip tighten around his wrist. She wanted to pull him back, to get him away from this moment, from this man. But Dany couldn't look away. The man wasn't like the one from the shelter. He wasn't clean-shaven or wearing a neat, corporate-like jacket. His clothes were worn, his beard uneven, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But there was something else in his face, something almost desperate. And then there was the photo, Luna. Standing tall and proud, her coat gleaming in the sun. She looked different, stronger, sharper, like she had once been something more than just a stray dog. but it was her. And beneath the image, 3 words stood out in bold black ink. Missing, reward offered. Noah's fingers curled around the edge of the door. Who are you? The man swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. My name is Jacob Harlow, he said, his voice rough, as if he hadn't spoken much in days. And that's my dog. Luna's growl deepened. It wasn't like before. It wasn't the warning snarl she had given the man at the shelter. This was different. This was hesitation. Recognition. Dany looked down at her, his heart racing. Luna knew him, but she didn't run to him. She didn't wag her tail. She stayed right where she was, planted between Dany and the door, her ears flicking back and forth as if she was thinking. Noah exhaled, his voice calm but firm. Do you have proof? The man, Jacob, nodded quickly, reaching into his coat pocket. He moved slowly, carefully, like he knew any sudden motion would get the door slammed in his face. He pulled out another photograph, slightly crumpled. But when he unfolded it, Dany felt his breath catch. It was Luna again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her, in the same golden light, stood Jacob. He looked different in the picture. Healthier, stronger. His beard was trimmed, his shoulders squared. His arm was slung around Luna's neck, and she looked up at him with something Dany hadn't seen her do with anyone else. Trust. His stomach twisted. Luna hadn't just known this man, she had belonged to him. Maya broke the silence first. You're saying she's yours? Jacob nodded, his hand tightening around the photo. Her name is Shadow, he said softly. She was my partner. Dany frowned. Partner? Jacob swallowed again. I was in the military, he explained, his voice rough. Shadow was my K9. We worked together for almost 3 years. Tracking, search and rescue, protection. She saved my life more times than I can count. Dany looked down at Luna, no, Shadow, but she still wasn't moving. She wasn't running to Jacob. She wasn't growling anymore. She was just watching. Noah glanced at the photograph again, his expression unreadable. If she's your dog, then how did she end up here? She showed up on our doorstep in the middle of a storm with 3 puppies. Jacob's jaw tightened. He took a slow breath, and then he said, because someone tried to kill me. Maya's grip on Dany's wrist immediately tightened. Noah's shoulders squared. What? Jacob let out a dry, humorless chuckle. It sounds crazy, I know. He ran a hand over his face. But I was working security after I got out of the military for a private contractor called Sentinel Security. I started noticing things, illegal things, weapons being moved under the table, transactions that didn't make sense. I started looking into it. His face darkened, and then one night I disappeared. Dany felt the air in the room shift. Jacob continued, his voice lower now. They drugged me. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, I was locked in a storage shed, handcuffed, barely conscious. I heard them talking about what to do with me, whether they should make it look like an accident or just bury me somewhere. Maya's face paled. Jacob shook his head. I was sure I was dead, but then Shadow found me. Dany's breath hitched. She found you? Jacob nodded. I don't know how, but she did. She got the door open. I was too weak to run, but she helped me, dragged me through the woods until we got far enough away. He exhaled shakily. I told her to run, to take something important with her. Noah frowned. Take what? Jacob hesitated, then a box. Silence. A chill ran down Dany's spine. His mind flashed back to that night. To Luna, Shadow, leading them into the woods. To the metal box they had found buried in the dirt. The one the man at the shelter had been looking for. Noah's jaw tightened. What was in it? Jacob exhaled. Documents, a flash drive, proof that Sentinel was involved in illegal weapons sales. He rubbed a hand over his eyes. I think Shadow, Luna, took it when she ran. She must have hidden it before she found you. Dany felt his heart pounding. She hadn't just been running. She had been on a mission, and somehow, in the middle of everything, she had chosen them. Jacob looked up at Noah, his expression pleading. I don't care about the reward, he said quietly. I just need to know if she's safe, if she remembers me. Noah's gaze flicked toward Luna. That's up to her. Jacob turned to the dog, and for the first time since arriving, he crouched down, meeting her at eye level. Shadow, he said softly. His voice was barely more than a whisper. It's me. Luna, Shadow, stared at him. Her ears twitched. Her body was so still that Dany could barely breathe. Then, for the first time, she moved. She took one slow step forward, then another. Jacob didn't move. He didn't call her. He just waited. And then, Shadow closed the distance between them, pressing her head against his chest. Jacob's breath hitched. His hands trembled as they reached for her, fingers burying into her fur. "Good girl," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Good girl." Dany felt a lump rise in his throat. She knew him, she remembered him. But as he watched them, a pit formed in his stomach. If Shadow had found Jacob, then whoever had tried to kill him would be coming for her next. Jacob held Shadow against his chest, his fingers gripping her fur as though he was afraid to let go. His breath was unsteady, a quiet tremor beneath the weight of everything that had led him here. Shadow, Luna, had found him. She had kept herself alive, carried out the mission he had given her, and in the process she had found people willing to protect her. Dany should have been happy. He should have felt relief, but all he could feel was fear. Because if Jacob was right, if Shadow had been running, hiding, surviving, then whoever had tried to kill him before wasn't finished. And now they knew exactly where she was. Noah cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "We need to talk." Jacob nodded, still crouched beside Shadow. He let out a slow breath before looking up. "Yeah, we do." Maya stepped forward, arms crossed. "You said people wanted you dead, that they might still be looking for you." Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of worry. "Does that mean our family is in danger?" Jacob didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched, and his eyes flickered to Dany, then back to Noah. Finally, he sighed. "I don't know," he admitted, "but if they figure out she's here..." He placed a hand gently on Shadow's head. "They'll come." Dany's stomach twisted. "But why? What do they want?" Jacob's expression darkened. "That box she buried, it's evidence. It proves what they've done: illegal weapon sales, contract violations, money laundering. If it gets into the wrong hands, they lose everything." Maya exhaled sharply. "And by wrong hands, you mean law enforcement?" Jacob nodded. "The FBI would tear Sentinel apart if they had proof." Noah frowned. "Then we give it to them." Jacob's eyes flicked toward the window, as if expecting someone to be standing there watching. "If we had time, yeah," he said. "But they're not going to just let that happen. If they think I'm still alive, if they know Shadow is here, they'll try to shut this down before that evidence ever sees daylight." Dany swallowed. "You mean they'll try to..." Jacob cut him off. "Yes." Silence fell over the room. Shadow let out a low, uneasy whine, pressing closer to Jacob's side. Maya tightened her arms around herself. "Then what do we do?" Jacob glanced down at the dog who had saved his life. "We protect her, and we find a way to bring these guys down before they find us." That night, Dany couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Shadow curled up on the floor beside him. The puppies were nestled together in the basket near the closet, their tiny bodies rising and falling with soft, steady breaths. Everything looked peaceful, but it wasn't. Jacob was downstairs, talking to his parents in hushed voices. He was going to stay with them, at least for now. Noah had agreed, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. Dany could feel it, the way his dad's voice had tightened, the way his mom kept glancing toward the windows. They weren't just worried, they were scared. And so was Dany. Shadow let out a soft exhale, her ears twitching. Dany reached down, running his fingers through her fur. "You okay, girl?" She didn't move, but she didn't sleep either. She was waiting, listening, just like him. Then, a noise. Dany stiffened. It wasn't loud, just a faint click. Then another and another. Shadow lifted her head. Her body tensed. Dany's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He turned toward the window. Outside, beyond the faint glow of the streetlights, the trees swayed in the wind. The yard was still, silent, but something felt wrong. Shadow's growl was barely audible, but Dany heard it. She was warning him. Something was out there. Someone. Dany scrambled out of bed and darted toward the door. "Dad!" he hissed. Footsteps rushed up the stairs. Noah appeared in the doorway, his eyes sharp with concern. "What is it?" Dany's pulse raced. "I heard something." Noah didn't ask questions. He just listened. Then, another click. Maya's voice floated up from downstairs. Noah? Noah turned sharply. Stay with Dany. Then he disappeared down the hallway. Shadow was already moving. She bolted toward the stairs, her nails clicking against the wood. Dany followed, his breath tight in his throat. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, he saw Jacob standing near the front door, his face grim. Someone tried to get in, Jacob muttered. Noah was checking the lock, his shoulders tense. Tried? Jacob pointed. It's been tampered with. See that scratch near the deadbolt? That wasn't there earlier. Dany's chest tightened. Someone had been here. Maya looked pale. Did they get inside? Noah shook his head. No, but they were trying. Shadow paced near the door, her hackles raised. Jacob exhaled slowly, his hands clenched into fists. They're watching us. Noah nodded. And they want in. Maya swallowed. So what do we do now? Jacob glanced at Shadow, then back at Noah. His expression was grim. We don't wait for them to make the first move, he said. Noah crossed his arms. You have a plan? Jacob's eyes darkened. Yeah, he said. We set a trap. The plan was risky, dangerous, but it was their only shot. Jacob explained it in short, clipped sentences, his military training taking over. They're going to come back, he said. We let them think they have a chance. We make them show themselves. Noah frowned. How? Jacob exhaled. Me. Maya stiffened. No. I'll go to the shelter, Jacob said. Act like I'm trying to find work. Make it clear that I'm back in town alive. If they're watching, they'll take the bait. Dany's stomach dropped. But what if they... Jacob shook his head. I won't be alone. His eyes flickered to Noah. I need you to follow me. Stay close. If something happens, we need proof that Sentinel is still operating. That they're still after me. Maya's hands clenched at her sides. This is dangerous. Jacob gave her a grim smile. So was waiting for them to come knocking. Noah exhaled, then reluctantly he nodded. Dany watched them, his heart pounding. And what about Shadow? Jacob turned to the dog, his expression unreadable. She stays with you, he said. Because if this goes wrong, his voice trailed off. But Dany understood. If the plan failed, Shadow would be their only hope. The fight for survival. The man's scream tore through the house as Shadow drove him to the ground, her teeth flashing dangerously close to his throat. Dany had never seen her like this before. Not when she was protecting the puppies. Not even when she had growled at the man from the shelter. This was different. This was war. Shadow wasn't just defending them. She was attacking. The man thrashed beneath her, trying to shove her off, but she was relentless. A furious growl rumbled from her chest as she sank her teeth into his forearm, preventing him from reaching for anything in his pockets. Maya pulled Dany back, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Go, she whispered, shoving him toward the hallway. Now! But Dany couldn't move. His feet felt rooted to the floor, his hands gripping the edge of the wall as he watched the fight unfold. The man reached into his jacket. Maya gasped, but before he could pull out whatever he was going for, Shadow bit down harder. He screamed again. Then, with a surge of strength, he kicked her off. Shadow yelped as she stumbled back, her claws scraping against the wooden floor. The man scrambled to his feet, his injured arms shaking, his breathing ragged. His eyes burned with rage as he reached inside his jacket again. Dany's blood froze. Gun. The realization hit him all at once. The man wasn't going to back down. He wasn't just here to scare them. He was here to take Shadow, or to kill her. Maya grabbed the closest thing she could, a lamp, and threw it. It shattered against the man's shoulder, knocking him sideways. Run, Dany, she screamed. Dany turned, but he wasn't running away. He was running towards something, the kitchen. His dad kept a fire extinguisher under the sink. His heart hammered in his chest as he yanked it out, barely registering the sound of Shadow snarling again. Then, he turned and sprayed. The burst of white mist hit the man full in the face. He staggered back, coughing violently, his hands flailing as he tried to clear his vision. Shadow took the opportunity. She leaped. This time, she didn't aim for his arm. She went for his legs. The man crashed to the floor, his gun skidding across the tile. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed it. Her hands shook as she aimed at the intruder. Don't move. The man groaned, his body twitching as he tried to push himself up. Shadow snarled, pressing a paw against his chest, her teeth inches from his face. Dany's breath came in short gasps. His hands were still clenched around the fire extinguisher, his body shaking from the adrenaline. Then, tires screeched outside. Noah. Jacob. Maya didn't lower the gun, her voice sharp. Dany, get the door. Dany ran. He ripped it open just as his dad and Jacob came bursting inside. Jacob froze when he saw the scene. His eyes flicked to the gun in Maya's hands, then to the man pinned beneath his shadow. His face hardened. Noah's jaw clenched. What the hell? Jacob cut him off. Reeves sent him. Noah inhaled sharply. Jacob stepped forward, kneeling beside the man, his voice ice cold. Who else is coming? The man coughed, spitting blood onto the floor. He didn't answer. Jacob's fingers curled into a fist. I asked you a question. The man laughed. It was a broken sound, wet and ragged, but there was something mocking in it. Jacob's nostrils flared. Where's the rest of your team? The man licked his split lip, then exhaled a slow, pained breath. They're already on their way. Jacob stiffened. Noah's head snapped toward the window, his expression going pale. Headlights, more than one. A convoy of cars speeding toward the house. Jacob muttered a curse under his breath. We need to move. Dany's heart pounded as Jacob yanked the man to his feet, pinning his arms behind his back. Take him? Noah asked. Jacob shook his head. Dead weight. We're outnumbered. We need to get clear before they get here. Maya lowered the gun, but she didn't let go of it. Where do we go? Jacob's mind was already working. We take the evidence. We take Shadow and the puppies. We disappear. Dany's stomach twisted. But this is our home. Jacob's face softened for just a moment. I know, kid. Then his expression turned grim again. But right now, it's a target. Maya's hands trembled. We can't just... The sound of doors slamming outside cut her off. A voice boomed from the driveway. Come out, Harlow. Jacob froze. Dany could barely breathe. Victor Reeves, the real monster, had arrived. Noah moved first. Back door. Maya grabbed the puppies. Jacob grabbed a duffel bag. Dany had no idea what was inside, but he didn't stop to ask. Then, Shadow moved. She didn't run to the back door. She positioned herself in front of Dany. Her message was clear. She was staying with him. Jacob's voice was sharp. We don't have time. Bang! The front window shattered. Dany screamed as glass rained down, the bullet embedding itself into the kitchen wall. Shadow barked viciously, her body pressing against Dany's legs. Jacob grabbed his shoulder. Move! Now! Maya threw open the back door. Jacob went first, scanning the yard. Then Noah. Maya pulled Dany close, and Shadow followed. They ran, through the grass, through the darkness, toward the woods. Behind them, the house stood in eerie silence, until the front door burst open with a crash. Dany turned just in time to see Victor Reeves stepping inside. And the last thing he heard before they disappeared into the trees was Shadow's snarl, a promise, a warning. This wasn't over. Into the woods, the night was thick with tension, the cold air biting at their skin as they ran. Dany's heartbeat pounded in his ears, matching the rhythm of his feet crashing against the damp earth. Shadow ran beside him, her breath coming in sharp, steady bursts. Even in the darkness, she moved with purpose, guiding him like she had done before. Only this time, they weren't running towards something. They were running away, away from the house, away from the men who had come for them, away from the danger that had finally caught up. Behind them, the sound of breaking wood and shattering glass echoed through the night. The house was being torn apart, ransacked. Dany knew why. They were looking for her, looking for the evidence she had carried. And if they found nothing, if they realized she was gone, they would come after them. Maya held onto him tightly, her grip firm but trembling as they pushed forward through the trees. The puppies wriggled in her arms, whining softly, but they didn't cry. They were too young to understand the fear swallowing the night whole. Noah was ahead, his flashlight flickering between the trees as he led the way. Jacob stayed close behind, his breath coming in slow, controlled exhales, his military training kicking in. Dany had never seen his father like this, his jaw tight, his movements precise. He was afraid, but he wasn't letting it stop him. They had to keep moving. Shadow's ears flicked up. Her body stiffened. Then, a snap. Somewhere behind them, a branch breaking. Not from them. Someone else was in the woods. Dany's stomach twisted. He turned his head, straining to see. Nothing but darkness. But he felt it. They weren't alone. Jacob stopped suddenly, grabbing Noah's arm. "Cut the light." Noah didn't question it. He flicked off the flashlight, and instantly the world plunged into a thick, endless black. Silence. Only the sound of their breathing. And then, footsteps. Slow, steady, calculated. Not close, not far. Dany gripped Shadow's fur. He could feel her muscles coil beneath his touch, ready to spring, ready to fight. Jacob crouched low, motioning for everyone to get down. They obeyed without hesitation, pressing against the ground, hidden in the undergrowth. The footsteps continued. Dany's pulse raced. His fingers trembled. Shadow didn't move, didn't breathe. She was waiting, listening. Then, a voice. "Spread out!" Dany's chest tightened. "Victor." Jacob's hand curled into a fist. They weren't just looking for the evidence. They were looking to kill. Jacob leaned toward Noah, his voice barely a breath. "We can't outrun them like this." Noah swallowed. "What do we do?" Jacob's jaw clenched. "We separate." Maya shook her head immediately. "No, no way." Jacob's voice was firm. "It's the only way to make them lose our trail." Maya's grip on Dany tightened. "I'm not leaving my son." "You won't," Jacob promised. "You'll take Dany and the puppies. Noah, you go with them. I'll lead the hunters in the other direction." Maya's eyes burned with protest, but Jacob's gaze was unwavering. "I've done this before," he murmured. "I know how to disappear." Dany's stomach twisted. "But..." Jacob turned to him, his expression softer. "Kid, you need to trust me." Dany felt the weight of Shadow against him, her warmth grounding him, keeping him steady. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave Jacob behind. But he knew. If they all ran together, they wouldn't make it. Jacob gave him a small, reassuring nod. Then, without another word, he turned and ran, straight toward the enemy. Noah grabbed Dany's wrist. "Let's go." They didn't wait, didn't hesitate. They ran. Maya's breaths were sharp, quick gasps as she held the puppies close, her feet moving as fast as they could without stumbling. Noah led them deeper into the woods, away from Jacob's diversion. But Dany's chest was still tight. Because Shadow, she had stayed behind. She had gone with Jacob. Dany looked back. For a split second, he saw them, a blur of movement in the darkness. Jacob darting between the trees, leading Victor's men into the shadows. And Shadow, her body low and fast, running beside him, moving like she was born for this. A trained soldier, a protector. His throat tightened. She was fighting for them, fighting for him, fighting to keep them safe. Dany didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if Jacob would make it. Didn't know if Shadow would come back. All he knew was that they had given them a chance, and they had to take it. "Keep going," Noah whispered. "We're almost there." Dany forced his feet forward, his breath sharp in his throat. He didn't stop. He didn't look back again. Because he couldn't. Not if he wanted to believe that Jacob and Shadow would be okay. Not if he wanted to believe that they would see each other again. So he ran, through the darkness, through the fear, through the unknown, and he hoped. Hoped that somewhere behind them, Shadow was still fighting, the cost of bravery. The night pressed against them, thick and suffocating. Dany's legs burned, his lungs ached, but he didn't dare stop. Not now, not yet. Noah led the way, his flashlight off to avoid detection. Only the moonlight, faint through the dense canopy, guided them. Shadow had bought them time. Jacob too. But time wasn't infinite. Dany knew that. And he also knew that some fights cost more than others. Maya gripped his hand tightly as they ran. She hadn't spoken since Jacob had disappeared into the trees. Not a single word, no one, not even to reassure him. Maybe because she knew there were no reassurances left to give. The puppies whimpered softly in her arms, their tiny bodies trembling. Dany wasn't sure if they could sense the fur in the air, or if they were just cold. Either way, he understood. He was trembling too. They reached the edge of the woods. Noah stopped suddenly, lifting a hand to signal silence. Ahead, barely visible in the darkness, was a small wooden structure. half hidden behind thick brush and twisted branches. Dany's pulse spiked. "Where are we?" he whispered. Noah didn't answer right away. He was listening, checking. Then he whispered back, "Safe house." Maya exhaled, shaky but relieved. "You have a safe house?" "Jacob does," Noah corrected. "He set this up years ago." Dany's chest tightened. "Jacob, was he okay?" Shadow had gone with him. She would protect him, right? She had to. She always did. Maya adjusted the puppies in her arms, glancing nervously behind them. "We should get inside." Noah nodded. "Come on." The door creaked as they stepped inside. It smelled like wood and dust, like something that hadn't been used in years, but was still waiting for a purpose. The cabin was small, just one room, a few old chairs, a cot against the far wall, a radio on a wooden table. Noah moved fast. He checked the windows, then locked the door behind them. Maya sank onto a chair, holding the puppies against her chest. Her eyes were tight with exhaustion. Dany didn't sit. He stood near the door, watching, waiting, his fingers curled into fists. Shadow should be here. Jacob should be here. But they weren't, and that meant something was wrong. Noah fiddled with the old radio, adjusting the dials until a faint crackle filled the silence. Then, "Morgan, you there?" Dany's breath caught. "Jacob." Maya shot upright. "Jacob!" His voice was strained. "We don't have long. Listen to me." A pause. A breath. "She's hurt." The world stopped. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. Dany felt his stomach drop. Shadow. Jacob's voice was controlled, but there was something in it, something raw. "She took a bullet," he continued. "We got away, but she's bleeding bad." Dany felt something shatter inside him. His throat tightened painfully. Shadow was hurt. His shadow, his protector, his best friend. Noah was already moving, grabbing a bag from beneath the cot. "Where are you?" "About 2 miles northeast," Jacob said. "By the riverbed." Maya was shaking. "We need to bring her here. We need to—" Jacob's voice hardened. "No, you stay put. They're still out there." Dany couldn't breathe. This wasn't fair. This wasn't fair. She had saved them, and now she was the one who needed help. Noah strapped the bag over his shoulder. "I'm coming to you." "I don't—" "Shut up, Jacob." Noah's voice was sharp. "I'm coming." Jacob didn't argue. Then the radio went silent. Noah turned to Maya. "Stay here, keep the kids safe." Maya nodded, but her hands were trembling. Dany's pulse thundered in his ears. No, he couldn't just stay here. Shadow was out there. She had protected him over and over again. It was his turn now. Before he could think twice, the words left his mouth. "I'm going with you." Noah froze. Maya's head snapped up. "Dany!" He met his father's gaze, eyes burning. "She needs me." Noah's jaw tightened. Maya grabbed Dany's arm. "It's too dangerous. She's my dog." The words exploded out of him before he could stop them. He didn't care. His chest ached. His throat burned. Shadow had never left him behind, and he wouldn't leave her. Noah stared at him for a long moment. Then, he sighed. "Fine," Maya gasped. "Noah!" "He's right." Noah's voice was firm. "Shadow needs him." Maya looked torn, then her eyes softened, just slightly. She knelt in front of Dany, cupping his face. "You come back to me," she whispered. "Both of you." Dany nodded, his heart hammering. Maya pulled him into a tight hug. Then, before she could change her mind, Dany ran, Noah right behind him. Dany had never run so fast in his life. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he didn't stop. Not until he saw them. Jacob and Shadow. She was lying on the ground, her breathing shallow. Blood stained her fur, dark against the pale moonlight. Dany's chest locked. "Shadow." She lifted her head weakly at his voice. Her tail thumped. Dany dropped beside her, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." Her eyes fluttered half shut. Noah was already pulling out medical supplies, moving quickly. Jacob pressed his hands to his knees, panting. "We don't have long," he muttered. "Victor's still looking." Dany didn't care. All he cared about was Shadow. Noah worked fast, cleaning the wound, applying pressure. Shadow whimpered but didn't fight him. Dany held her paw. Her eyes found his. And in that moment, he knew she wasn't giving up. Not yet. She was still fighting, because she always fought for him. And now, he was fighting for her. A race against time, Shadow's breathing was shallow, her eyes fluttering open and shut, as if she was struggling to stay awake. Blood matted the fur on her side, the bandage Noah had quickly wrapped around her, barely holding back the flow. Dany clutched her paw, his small fingers gripping it tightly, as if he could will her to stay with him. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You have to be okay." Shadow's tail gave a weak, barely there wag. Jacob crouched next to them, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We need to get her out of here. She's lost too much blood." Noah nodded, his jaw set. "We need a vet, fast." Jacob ran a hand through his damp, sweat-streaked hair. "We're miles from the nearest town, and we can't just walk into a clinic with a bullet-wounded dog when Victor's men are still looking for us." Dany looked up, his chest tightening. "So what do we do?" Silence. Jacob exhaled sharply. "I know someone." Noah's eyes flicked to him. "Who?" Jacob's lips pressed into a thin line. "An old contact from my military days. He's off the grid, but he's the kind of guy who doesn't ask questions. If anyone can help us keep Shadow alive, it's him." Noah hesitated. "You trust him?" Jacob's gaze darkened. "More than I trust any hospital right now." Dany didn't care who it was. All that mattered was saving Shadow. "Then let's go," he said, his voice firm, despite the fear curling in his stomach. Jacob nodded, pulling out a burner phone from his jacket. He stepped away, speaking in hushed tones while Noah started rigging together a makeshift stretcher, using an old tarp and 2 fallen tree branches. Shadow let out a weak whimper when they lifted her onto it, and Dany's heart broke. But she didn't fight it. She trusted them, and they wouldn't let her down. Not now, not ever. Jacob's contact was a 20-minute drive from their position, if they could avoid running into Victor's men along the way. Noah drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Jacob sat beside him, his hand resting on his gun, his sharp eyes scanning the dark road ahead. Maya had begged Dany to stay behind at the cabin with her and the puppies. He had refused. He wouldn't leave Shadow. He sat in the back seat, his hands resting gently on her fur. He could feel her shallow breaths beneath his fingers, her warmth seeping into his skin. Every few minutes she would stir, just slightly, her ears twitching, her tail giving the faintest flicker. "She's still fighting," Dany whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Jacob glanced at him in the rearview mirror. His expression softened, just for a moment. "She's a tough girl," he said. "She's been through worse." Dany swallowed, blinking back the burning behind his eyes. "I don't want her to go through worse." Jacob didn't answer, because he couldn't promise that she wouldn't. The tension in the car was thick. Every mile felt like a lifetime. Then, Jacob tensed. "Slow down," he muttered to Noah. Dany's stomach twisted. "What is it?" Noah eased off the gas. The road ahead was dark, the trees looming like silent watchers. Then Dany saw them, headlights, 2 cars, blocking the road. His heart stopped. Noah cursed under his breath. "Roadblock." Dany's fingers clenched into Shadow's fur. Jacob's voice was ice. "Victor's men." Noah's hands flexed on the wheel. "Do we turn around?" Jacob's jaw worked. "They'll be expecting that." Noah's gaze flicked to the rear-view mirror. "We've got Shadow in the back, Jacob. We can't risk a firefight." Jacob exhaled sharply. "Let me handle it." Dany froze. Handle it? Before he could ask what that meant, Jacob was already pulling a badge from his pocket. Dany blinked. "Wait, you're FBI?" Jacob huffed a quiet laugh. "No, kid, just an old fake ID, but it might buy us time." Dany's stomach churned. This wasn't a plan, this was a gamble. The cars in front of them didn't move. Then, a man stepped into the beams of their headlights. Dany recognized him immediately. Victor Reeves. A chill raced down his spine. Jacob opened the door, stepping out before Noah could stop him. Dany's breath caught. Victor tilted his head, a slow smirk curling on his face. Well, well, look who finally came out in hiding." Jacob's stance was calm, controlled. "Step aside, Victor." Victor chuckled. "No, I don't think I will." Jacob sighed. "Didn't think you'd say yes." Then, without hesitation, he pulled his gun and fired. Chaos. A shot rang out, then another. Noah slammed the car into reverse. "Hold on!" Dany clutched Shadow tightly, shielding her body as the car lurched backward. Jacob fired again, diving behind the hood for cover as Victor's men scrambled. Shouts filled the air. Dany's pulse raced. Shadow let out a weak whimper beneath him, and something inside him snapped. This was all because of Victor. He was the reason Shadow was hurt, the reason they had been running, the reason Jacob had been locked away for months, and Dany hated him for it. Jacob's voice cut through the noise. "Go!" Noah didn't hesitate. He spun the wheel, the tires screeching as he whipped the car into a narrow gap between the trees. Branches scraped against the seas, leaves slapping against the windshield as they tore through the woods. Bullets whizzed past, but they didn't stop. Dany barely breathed. The road opened up ahead, clear and empty. Noah gunned the engine and they flew. Dany looked back. Jacob was gone. So was Victor. But the roadblock was getting smaller in the distance, and that meant one thing. Jacob had bought them time. Dany turned back to Shadow, his eyes burning. Her breathing was shallower now, her body still, but she was still here, still fighting, and he wouldn't let her fight alone. His fingers brushed over her fur. "Hold on," he whispered. "We're almost there." Shadow didn't move, but somehow he knew. She heard him, the fight to live. The world outside the car was a blur, trees rushing past like ghosts in the night. The tires thundered against the uneven road, bouncing the car with every pothole. But Dany barely noticed. His whole world had shrunk to the still form beside him. Shadow lay against him, her breathing shallow. Blood had seeped through the hastily applied bandage, staining his hands as he pressed them against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. She wasn't moving. Dany's chest ached. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, Shadow, you have to stay with me." And her tail twitched. Barely. But it was enough. Dany sucked in a sharp breath, blinking away the sting of tears. Noah's voice was tight from the front seat. "We're almost there." "How much longer?" Jacob's voice crackled over the radio. "5 minutes," Noah responded. "If we don't run into another damn roadblock." Dany barely heard them. He stroked Shadow's fur gently, whispering over and over, "We're almost there, just a little longer." But she was so still. Too still. And Dany was terrified. The cabin came into view through the trees, an old structure hidden off a back road that barely existed on a map. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time, except for the faint glow of a lantern in the window. Noah slammed the brakes. Dany barely waited for the car to stop before throwing open the door. Jacob was already outside, scanning the area for threats. When he saw Shadow's motionless body, his jaw tightened. A man stepped out from the cabin, a gruff-looking figure in his late 50s, salt and pepper hair, sharp eyes that flicked between them with practiced efficiency. "Get her inside," he ordered. Jacob didn't waste time on introductions. He scooped Shadow up in his arms, her limp body looking too small against his broad frame. Dany ran after them. Inside, the air was warm, smelling faintly of old wood and antiseptic. The stranger, a former military medic named Reynolds, according to Jacob, had already cleared a table, setting up supplies faster than Dany had ever seen anyone move. "Put her here," Reynolds instructed. Jacob laid Shadow on the table. Dany climbed onto a chair beside her, gripping her paw again. "Can you save her?" he asked, his voice small. Reynolds didn't answer right away. He was already cutting away the blood-soaked bandages, his eyes sharp and assessing. Dany held his breath. Then Reynolds muttered, "She's got a fighting chance." Dany nearly collapsed with relief. Reynolds worked quickly. He stitched the wound, his hands steady even as more blood seeped onto the table. Shadow flinched once, her only reaction to the needle threading through her skin. "She lost a lot of blood," Reynolds murmured. "If she was human, I'd say she'd need a transfusion." Dany stiffened. "But she's not human." Reynolds exhaled. "No, she's not. And that's the only reason she's still alive." Dany swallowed. "Will she wake up?" Reynolds gave a short nod. "If she makes it through the night, she'll make it." Dany clung to those words. If she makes it through the night, he wouldn't leave her side. Not now. Not ever. Hours passed. Shadow didn't wake. Dany stayed beside her, his fingers gently stroking her ear. Noah and Jacob talked in hushed voices by the door. Maya had called to check in. The puppies were safe, still curled up in their nest back at the cabin. But Dany didn't care about any of that. He only cared about her. "Dany," Noah's voice was gentle. "You should sleep. Dany shook his head. I'm not leaving her. Jacob exhaled. Kid, I'm not leaving. Jacob met his gaze. Then he nodded. No one tried to move him again. Dany didn't remember falling asleep. He only remembered waking up to something warm pressing against his hand. He stirred, blinking blearily. Then his heart stopped. Shadow's eyes were open, weak, unfocused, but open, and she was looking right at him. Dany's breath hitched. Shadow? Her tail moved, just slightly, but it was enough. Dany let out a choked laugh, rubbing his face as relief crashed over him. You scared me, he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. You really scared me. Shadow let out a soft, content sigh. Jacob leaned against the doorframe, a small smirk tugging at his lips. Told you she was tough. Noah exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. She's a damn miracle. Reynolds stepped forward, checking her pulse, inspecting the stitches. Then he grunted. She'll need rest. A lot of it. Dany nodded fiercely. She'll get it. She had fought so hard. Now he would fight for her. He would keep her safe, just like she had done for him. Forever.